Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com here in San Diego, California. If you're looking to replace your fuel pump, you know where to go, ScooterWest.com. But today I'm going to tell you everything I can ever tell you about a Vespa fuel pump, specifically a fuel-injected fuel pump found on pretty much the Vespa products from 2006 and on. So a lot of the Vespas have gone to fuel injection, which is a good thing. These are typically tremendously reliable. Some of the early ones did have a recall on it. So if you're having issues with your fuel pump, the first thing you may want to just check with the dealer and run the VIN number. There's a chance it has a recall fuel pump. They had some issues where these would jam up when they got hot and it would stall out the scooter or wouldn't restart. But today I'm going to show you everything you need to know about rebuilding one of these fuel pumps and the variations between the parts the various models, and this also correlates to the Piaggio products. Keep in mind the 400 and the 500 Piaggio, like the MP3s, BB350 and BB400 and smaller use all the components are pretty much identical, regardless of the engine size, all the way down to the 50. So all the parts here are all identical. They have different variations of the cap, different variations of the bracketry, so that's pretty much the difference. And part of the video I'll show you how to swap parts between them. I'm going to show you how to replace the fuel filter, the strainer, and of course the fuel pump and the hose. One thing to keep in mind, this is inherently pretty dangerous because when you pull this out of the fuel tank, there's gas still in here and there's electrical connections. These were never intended from the manufacturer to be rebuilt, but fortunately, at ScooterWest.com, I do have all the rebuild parts. I'm going to show you how to use them. The safest and best option is always just to replace. The downside is these are rather expensive. And there's different variations. You want to make sure you get the correct one for your model year and model Vespa. This is going to be the most common fuel pump, and it's used on most of the Vespa 300s, Primaveras and Sprints, the earlier models. Later down the road, they changed them. If you look at these, to the untrained eye, it looks identical. Then you look at the top, they actually only have one fuel line connection on the top on the later models. They call it a returnless fuel system. The early versions had the return, so there's two separate fuel lines, and pretty much cars, everything went to a single deadheaded design. The good thing is this is a less expensive fuel pump. It is possible to swap this cap from your old pump to a new pump. Say you had a really bad condition pump. That would save you a couple bucks versus buying the specific GTS 250 pump, which is this one. And that's what we're going to rebuild today. One other little tip I'll tell you about right here. This is likely a recall fuel pump. I've destroyed most of these that were replaced under recall. They typically have a made in China black top pump. If it's got the brown top, these aren't affected by the recall. So that's just a little tip if you pull it out. If you're wondering how to remove this fuel pump, check out some of my past videos, and I show all the details on how to drop the tank, practically almost drop the engine on a Vespa to replace the fuel pump. Some of the telltales it doesn't work is you don't hear that prime. Like when you turn the key on, you'll hear this fuel pump motor make a real faint noise. If it just makes a little click and the fuse is good and you verify there's power at the connection, it's likely a jammed up fuel pump. Other issues is you end up with internal leaks, sometimes a fuel pressure regulator issue, that's located right there. But most of the time they get completely clogged because somebody didn't use the scooter for several years in many cases, and they just won't build pressure. This is a factory fuel pressure gauge, and pretty much all the Vespa products, they run, when the fuel pump's running, you know, like the scooter started and running, you should see 3 bar, which corresponds to about 43 PSI, and it should hold fairly steady. And the way these make a connection is it actually intercepts in between the fuel injector and the fuel hose. So these are like a quick release. I'll kind of show you how that works. The videos on how to remove the whole fuel pump show that. So you push this in, You hear that little click? That's pretty important. It makes a click. If there's ever leaks or any problems with this, you just want to start with a new fuel pump. You don't want to mess with this because the problem is when these parts leak, they typically will leak onto the hot exhaust and you end up with a pretty dangerous situation. So you can see this is locked in there. And the way to unlock this is you push it down and pushing down the gray part against the fuel pump, and then you can pull the line out. And that works with both the return and the supply. So on these older ones, make sure you don't get those mixed up. It will operate just fine with them swap, but then the hoses are a little bit tangled up. So that's the tip to how to make the connection. And oftentimes they do have this little plug if it's a brand new fuel pump. Again, you know, the Piaggio recommended practice, if you have a bad fuel pump or fuel filter, is to replace the whole entire thing, because these typically, they're not recommended that you service it. But here's Vespa Motorsport and Scooter West. I want to show you how to do it, save $1. And I'll show you some of the parts that we do have available to rebuild them. And they're pretty universal, like I said. Mainly the bracket and the head is what's different between the various models of fuel pump. So first of all, you got the fuel pump motor, and that's 640516-pump. That's actually the GTS 250 part number, I think. And this is a pretty high quality replacement that we source out of Italy. I've had good luck with them. There's cheaper pumps out there, and you don't really want to mess with a cheaper pump. It does have a black top, but it's just made by an aftermarket supplier, so it's a little different, but that's pretty much a drop-in replacement. So you got that part that we're going to use. Other parts you can buy individually is you could buy the fuel filter. This is like a universal fuel filter made by like a pretty reputable brand. Pretty hard to change, I'll warn you. Typically you have other issues, or you're running some really bad gas to really clog this oversized fuel filter. Not really much of an issue, but we do have available. You see the part number right there. Another part that's available is the fuel pressure regulator. And you can find that part number 639357-FR for fuel regulator. And you can see that's the 3-bar or 43 PSI pressure regulator. Actually goes in that direction. I'll pull this one out and show you. Typically, in my experience, these are pretty reliable, but we do have that available. Here's another part these sometimes can get deteriorated from bad fuel, or they just get clogged up. And this is the filter sock. Typically, replace a motor, you always want to put a new sock on there. They call it a strainer or sock. It's a little bit smaller as an aftermarket one, but it works just as well. And again, that same 639357-sock is the replacement filter. But if you're going to do the whole replacement of the pump, this hose is very difficult to reuse. It is possible, but it's not exactly easy. I would recommend buying the whole entire kit, the 639357 kit. It comes with far more than you need. You know, various strainers. We're not going to use some of these strainers. Those are for other pump models. This flex hose, it's a nylon hose. They're typically engineered to be used one time. That Malle filter, along with some one-time use pincer style hose clamps, like you can see right there. So we're going to go ahead and install all these items. And keep in mind, you're working with gas. This has been dried out, so you know, sitting outside of a bike for a long time or a scooter for a while, so there's not any residual gas. If you're using things like heat guns, even though they don't have flames, they are high temperature and it could possibly ignite that. Another option is just go in here and cut that hose. You know, that's the safest way to dismantle this. But all right, let me quickly go over the tools. The more dangerous way to loosen up these fuel lines is with a heat gun. My recommended way may be boiling water. Keep in mind, some of these parts aren't going to be reused if you're going to put them in boiling water. You get a Phillips screwdriver, a couple really small flat bladed screwdrivers to pry off a little clip. I have a little 6mm socket to push the clip back on. That's what retains this fuel pump to that hanger. Of course, a trusty pocket knife. Pretty useful to have a pincer style diagonals. You know, these are for squeezing one-time use hose clamps. but just regular cutters, side cutters work well, and also I just have a set of pliers. Probably want to have gloves, safety glasses on, which I have here, and just keep in mind the risk of fire. Kind of systematically take this all apart. So you can see there's a pair of screws right here, and there's the regular Phillips. And I'm going to do this on a paper towel. You want to keep everything pretty clean, because even if you got small particles of dirt that go into the fuel system, if you clog the fuel injector, that could be an issue too. They do have a real small filter built into the fuel injector, but it's not something you want to really clog up. So kind of got a rag right here just to start setting parts. So at this point, it's going to start separating. You kind of got to rock it because everything's pretty stiff. You got these pair of wires that are usually in that clip. There's some extra slack here, so we're going to rock the whole entire assembly, and it sometimes takes quite a bit of force to get this out. Sometimes I'll use a tool in here and lever between the pump top and the fuel filter, and you can see it's starting to separate right here. So it's exactly what I wanted to do. There's a little clip that's going to stay behind right there, so you can pull that out, and that stays with these screws. And then there's actually a connection for this fuel pump that can be disconnected. So you get your 2 fingers on these 2 clips, and this connection actually will disconnect just like that. So there's a part that was left behind. This is the O-ring. Usually these are pretty durable there. So there's the O-ring that's for the fuel filter. The fuel pressure regulator, again, that's going to be pretty difficult to get out. I'm not going to replace it because I know this one's good. This pump actually did work. It's just a recall pump, so it's a perfect candidate to replace. And because I don't want that pump out and to have a failure. These are typically pretty difficult to remove sometimes, just like that other one. So grasp it and just twist, and it will pull right out. And again, it's got like a little O-ring. So that's your fuel pressure regulator. And you can see it goes into this spigot right here. So at this point, I could, it's possible for me to buy this whole entire less costly fuel pump assembly that we may have in stock if you want just to swap this top over. That's the only thing different between the 300 pump and the 250 pump. Not including the much newer Vespas. They went to a much safer design for the connections, so they're slightly different. But these ones are definitely easier to use. Some of the newer stuff, you need kind of specialized tools to take apart. So I got the top separated. There's another little part of this fuel filter. This is actually the O-ring retainer, and that just pops right off. So we'll separate that part. And you have the pair of connections. They're just quick connects. There's a small one, and it's actually a little on the loose side. I have seen those sometimes be loose and cause an intermittent issue. So you can always crimp new connections on there, but I'll crimp those down. That's your little wiring harness. You can't mix them up because they got a larger, like 3/16 and a smaller 1/8 or 6 and 4 millimeter connection right there. And you can see the fuel filter kind of wants to come out. But we're not quite there yet with that. So the strainer is pretty simple to remove. So you could just get a little flat blade screwdriver and pry that right off. Again, we'll probably discard that part and put a new one in there. But the fuel pump, I want to pull this out, and there's just enough clearance to get the fuel pump separated. Under here is a clip, and sometimes you got to just pry at it with a small screwdriver and kind of work your way around. And it will get a little bit distorted, but it is typically reusable. The nice thing is these other filter socks usually come with that little clip in there. You could reuse that, and that's what that does, is that retains the fuel pump into this plastic housing. So I'm kind of working my way around with a real small screwdriver. Put your finger over it so it doesn't fly off. Maybe go to a larger screwdriver now that we got it, most of the way off here. Almost got it. You can see it gets a little bit distorted. And now I got that little clip off, so that's now separated, but it's still in good shape. We'll be able to reuse that. And the fuel pump at this point will just pull right out of this, this little socket right here. So at this point, can't quite get it out because this one-time use hose is difficult to remove. If you do want to remove this, the recommended practice is to put this in boiling water. You may ruin the pump, but that will get this hose nice and soft. But since this thing is completely evaporated of any residual fuel in there, we're going to use a heat gun. So definitely do this at your own risk. Just carefully heating this up all the way around. Again, boiling water might be the better solution for removing this hose here. Let's see if that's hot enough to start removing. And oftentimes, it's like a Chinese finger trap, and they like to be pushed off. So sometimes you just carefully push this off the barbs. You might have to heat it up again. You can see it's definitely pretty loose because it's wanting to rotate. If you pull too hard, it will just damage the hose. But again, I'm not really reusing this hose. I'm just showing you that it is possible to remove this with a bit of heat. Again, if you're replacing the kit, you could just cut this hose off and dispose of it. So definitely needs a little hose. It's definitely kind of rotating around on here, so it's getting softened up. There we go. So I got it off, and you might want to squeeze it down, still pretty hot, and put it in cold water so it shrinks up just a little bit if you are going to reuse it. Again, I don't recommend reusing this. And if you are going to reuse it, just like on the fuel filter, I'll show you this old fuel filter, you want to put a one-time use small style hose clamp. These aren't the easiest things to get a hold of. You can buy packs of McMaster car, and they're very specific on the sizes, but you'll definitely need to put a hose clamp on it, because when I put that back on the fuel pump, it's going to be just a little looser than what it was, and you're going to end up with a leak here and in turn low fuel pressure. But I'll take it all the way off. Another way, if you want to remove these clamps, usually the easiest way is just get a diagonal underneath it and then peel back the stainless steel tab, and it kind of will kind of separate just like that. So, and again, this side will remove the same way. And there's how you could separate the fuel filter. Say, for instance, you just want to replace the fuel filter. Like I said, most of the time you replace the fuel filter because of other issues. So you can see this is a more universal style fuel filter. It's got the little arrows, but it is possible to use that smaller barb, and we would put that right on that along with a clamp. You know, probably heat that up so it slide right on. But we're not going to reuse this part. We're not going to reuse this fuel pump, probably throw that out and not reuse that. We're going to use all the newer parts right here. So we got the hanger, the cap, and pretty much in the reverse order, we're going to reassemble everything. So the replacement hose uses a larger barb versus that original hose that uses the smaller size barb. So what I want to do is cut these smaller barbs. You know, like I said, it's universal, so it does work with the older style, you know, the smaller hose there. But you can carefully cut that off with a diagonal or a really sharp blade on both sides. So definitely want to cut the outlet side, because you never need the smaller on the outlet side that goes up into this fuel pump like that. And you can deburr it very carefully with a knife. And sometimes there's little burrs in other spots. Not a bad idea to clean it up. And same with this, you could use a sharp knife and cut it, or just nice and easy, use the diagonals here. You could probably just leave that on there as well. It's not going to really hurt anything on the outlet, having the extra length, but, or the inlet that is, but the outlet you definitely need to trim that because it has too much length. So there you go, and keep in mind those arrows right there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this little O-ring retainer on the outlet, so the arrow is pointing up. And then I have this O-ring right here. You want to take something like some dielectric grease. And if you're especially reusing the O-ring, these O-rings are kind of standardized for fuel injection applications. You could find them at the auto parts store, you know, for older fuel injections. So I got a little bit of that dielectric grease on there, so that's all ready to go. Little messy right there. And the next thing is I want to put this hose, you know, the fuel filter goes in just like this. Got a little bit of friction right there, and you know, we'll be able to put that all back on and it will all line up. But I want to get this hose on here. So the way you want to set up these hoses right here is you want to have this clip ready to go. Either boiling water or heat gun, and we'll go ahead and heat this up. Make sure you don't start distorting the line and melting it too much, but you want to heat up because that's going to soften up this nylon. Starting to get nice and hot, you know, definitely hot to the touch. I want it where it's like almost burning me. Okay, I think it's pretty soft, and work quick. See that? And you get it right on there. That thing's a little hot. And the way you use these OEM style hose clamps is this is a pincer. And I'll show you how this works. I'm going to go ahead and just pinch this one down. And that's on there permanently. So the way these work is this is a side diagonal, and it pinches down, and this metal kind of shrinks down, so it's a one-time use hose clamp. They're very reliable. It is possible to use regular diagonals, but these are going to get a nice linear force on it. These are, you know, Nipex brand. I don't know, I just call them pincers. And then you can also use them sideways too. They got a side pincer right there. So next we're going to move on to the new fuel pump. And the RMS one says N09. I'm not sure what that number means, but it does have two little rubber caps on this line right here. So this hose is a little bit longer, but it will just work just fine. So kind of just to do a little test fit, you can make sure everything lines up, drops in like that, and the fuel line is going to go like that right there. So as what I like to do is go ahead and assemble it all while it's just like this. So go ahead and put the clamp there, this little clip that retains the fuel pump. And the best way to push those on is with a little small socket, like a 6 or 7 millimeter socket. All right, so we'll take this little clip, and I got a little socket, and just push that right on. Just like that, and that fuel pump's locked in there now, so no issues with that. And kind of do a test fit right there. Again, heat this up. So it's pretty hot right now, and go ahead and roll that around and push it right on there. And kind of give it a squeeze. The whole idea of the corrugation there is it you know, allows it to bend and flex a little bit. And then we'll use the side pincer right over the barbs and go ahead and pinch that down. So this hose is a little bit larger. So when you're installing the fuel pump, you're definitely going to need to squeeze it as you're putting this into the tank. So just keep that in mind. This universal replacement hose is a little bit larger, so a little bit different. So we got the new fuel filter, new pump. We'll put the new sock. And it kind of just goes sideways like this. It's a little bit different. They have a metal cup on here, so push it right on there, and that kind of sits in the bottom of the tank just like that. Next we'll do the electrical connection, and I like to give these a little, use this, just give them a little squeeze because I want them to be tight on the two terminals on the fuel pump. You don't want to have it arcing or make an intermittent connection. A lot of people are always like, how can you have electrical stuff inside a fuel pump? But the oxygen, you know, it's not the stoichiometric ratio for proper combustion. It's actually too much, the vapors so high. I mean, there probably is a certain scenario where it is possible to make a spark in a fuel tank, but that still feels kind of loose. See how that's kind of loose? Again, you could always just put a new terminal on there as well. New crimp terminal. Make sure you use a really high quality one. I'm going to give it a little bit of a pinch. And you can even do, see how I'm using diagonals? They work pretty good for pinching down. Oh yeah, that's definitely much tighter this time. So that's a very tight fit. And then the positive connection has a little insulation on it, and that's nice and tight as well. So we kind of have that all ready. We're going to put the cap back on, and that's O-ring that's on that fuel pressure regulator. We'll put a small amount of dielectric grease on there. Again, you could replace that part, but this one looks to be in really nice shape. I've seen them where they're really rusty. That's probably an ideal scenario where you want to replace it. So the one that has the 4 or 3 little prongs, that's where the fuel pressure regulator goes. And you just twist it and it just pushes right in. And then next you have this little clip, and it goes this direction. We'll make the electrical connection. So these little like prongs kind of go towards this, and we'll click right in. And I'm kind of holding the whole assembly. And you can kind of just steer it until this little, the O-ring for that, the top drops right in. Tuck those wires in here. There's also a gasket that goes with the fuel pump. I have that removed currently. There's a little clip right here that holds the wire. Sometimes it won't quite hold them. And then push this up. And we'll go ahead and install the 2 screws. So that's pretty much a completely rebuilt GTS 250 fuel pump assembly, and you're going to save some bucks over that OEM assembly. So sometimes that clip will just get out of position, so you may need to feed that back up with a screwdriver, just like that. So now it's in position. Kind of hold the pump upside down because that clip is just held by the gravity. Once you get the screws in there, it's going to stay put. So there we go. Now it's nice and tight. And there's one more thing you could do to make it a little more OEM. So black zip ties, typically those are fuel resistant. And if you look at the original fuel pump, there's a zip tie right here that kind of holds the wiring. So you could zip tie the pair of wires to this hose right here, and it kind of just stabilizes the wiring from vibration. Just like that. And just, you know, this ground wire is kind of not staying in place. Can't hurt, put another zip tie in there, so you can do something like this, you know, stabilize the 2 wires. Just an extra added measure. Probably not 100% necessary, but I got the zip tie here. So there you go. So now both of them are in that little clip. So look at that. So it's rebuilt with aftermarket parts. It's going to be completely functional. These are all pretty high quality parts. I've tested them out. And we'll be able to drop this right in. So the only thing that looks old is the top of the fuel pump. So, and you know, I'll probably clean that up. Sometimes you spray these out with carburetor cleaner. You want to just make sure there's no debris in there. I could test the fuel pump if I want to put it in a tank of gas and energize it. It's a pretty dangerous job to do, or drop it into a fuel tank and make sure it builds that 43 PSI or 3 bar. I don't have any doubt that's not going to work, so I think it's all ready to go. So there you have it. There's how to rebuild a fuel pump with aftermarket spare parts. I hope you found that useful. Again, this pretty much applies to all the fuel injected Vespas and many of the Piaggio products that are also fuel injected. Nearly the identical parts are found in all the fuel pumps. Even like an Aprilia motorcycle or scooter, they're probably going to use some of the same parts. You know, they're trying to amortize the cost. But when you got to replace this whole entire assembly with a factory new part, you're in the several $100 range, while the individual parts are much less. All right, well, thanks for watching. Again, if you're looking for a video specifically on how to remove and install this assembly, I've covered that in the past. You can just do some YouTube searches, or better yet, if you're on a PC, just go to the Vespa Motorsport, you know, type Vespa Motorsport in the YouTube search, and there's an individual search that allows you to search the over 950 videos that I've made over the years, mostly about Vespas, and will pinpoint you right to fuel pumps. If you type in fuel pumps, you're probably going to have about a half dozen different videos I've done over the years. So that's one tip on how to find other videos for repairs and service and accessories and all the other fun stuff that goes along with Vespa scooters.
Hey everybody, this is Robot here, Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. I'm signing out on a good note on a nice snowstorm at over 14,000 feet. Probably best if I get off this mountain. I'll see you on the next one.